Good morning, everyone out there in the world today. Today is January 30th, 2025, and I'm trying to do a few recordings today for future publications on the next few days. So we'll see how far we get. This is my first recording of reading into the record today. This is my grandmother. You might remember Marianne Pascoe. She was born in 1913. She lived a good, long, productive life until 2006. When she was 93, she passed away and um, into the heavenly realm. She was a true angel here on earth. And I am focusing on another, I say, part two of Cornwall, her ancestry. And that is a geographical location um, that has woven through my own life, and I'm putting into the next book in this calendar novel series. This is the Winter collection. It's the first three books in the Winter trilogy, and that would be January, February, March. Surprise. So the next book coming out is April novel. I have it pretty much completed. But I felt like there were some spiritual themes that I was missing in it. And if you go to my website, Erica Swenson Elliott, if you're a big reader, you'd like to give the gift of reading to others, this is under the spiritual fiction series that I'm working on. So Cornwall is a very ancient, um, historical, woven through the tales of history. And we've talked about it, touched base on it a little bit already. This is the township that I grew up in, where a lot of Cornish people came to and were the first Quakers from England to settle in the area. So I found in my grandmother's records um, a lot of Cornish interesting illustrative history that ties some pieces together for me. I'm just going to come back to the map. We looked at this before. This is the very southwest tip of England, Cornwall, and there is very a lot of mining history that came here going back to before the time of Jesus Christ, so maybe 2,500 years ago. The article I'm going to read into the record today um, touches on a lot of interesting history with that. So the 12 Quakers that settled Bensalem, Pennsylvania, in the late 1600s were wealthy merchantmen from this area. And I'm going to come back so you can see Nana's picture one more time. And so this is her senior high school picture from 1931. She was born into the coal mining town of upstate Pennsylvania, about 100 miles uh, north of Philadelphia. And her family came in the late 1800s from with their coal mining expertise and brought it into the whole area, not just the town of Coaldale. I'm going to show you her senior newspaper. I'm actually looking to collect more of these. She had this because this was the Orange and Black was her high school newspaper that they made. They did not have yearbooks until 1933. So she has letters from these two. This is one of their friends of their older brothers that became the school principal. If you look on page two, here's Nana. She was the poet editor, and here's the poet's corner. So she was the one gathering these poems. And I knew she did this as a grandmother, and I knew she always loved poetry, but I didn't know how far back it had gone and that this was, something that she had done in high school. So here's a junior wrote something anonymously to them, going, going, gone. Amos Squito, a mosquito. And I think that's all their little poems. Now her page. So I have this in original form. She's on. I've also put their photos on Find a Grave. This is her before we edited out the ink spot that got under her head. There's another copy. I have two copies. The other one, she has yours truly written across the corner here. Her nickname was Maisie, which I didn't know either, but she was definitely the record keeper. So this whole record keeping up with the past is something that came through to me. I clearly inherited with all the books behind me. Oh, and up here, that is their actual yearbooks that started from 1933. She had up to about 1945, and she was a graduate, so she was keeping the archives for the school. So to come back to here in Cornwall, this is what I wanted to get as background. So I found this newspaper clipping of Nana's from June 8th, 1996. So almost 30 years ago. And it's the early time spotlight. It's from one of the small local papers of upstate coal country of Pennsylvania. And you can see it says the Cornish. I haven't scanned this one yet. I will be when we're done this little call. The Cornish, their blood flows through the veins of many in the coal regions. About the author, Bradford E. Landon, Landon, of Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, and that town was named after the famous athlete of the century, Jim Thorpe, who was a Native American. I know one of his tribes was Fox, and I forget the other name, Fox and something. Um, they renamed after his death the town of Malshunk, which was an Indian name, I think, for water, a watering hole. They renamed it when his body came home to there, not home to there, but was buried there, and there is a shrine to him to this day. That's a whole different story. But so this author, Bradford Landon, was raised in the Slate Belt region, and his grandfather was a Cornishman. And Nana would call this, they weren't from England, they were Cornish. So it was definitely had its own distinctive history, kind of like the Sicilians say they're Sicilian, not Italian. Sometimes like it's the same thing here with these Englishmen. They were Cornish first before they were English. Um, so I found that, and she talked that way too, even though her ancestors had been in America at least for one or two generations before her. So there was still one of the jokes in the mines was if you were in, sorry for the weed whacker out there. Um, One of the jokes in the mines were like no matter what mine in the world you went down into the hole, there was always at least one Cornishman down there, and they would take their skills and were very mercenary in the sense that they could go and kind of been doing it for generations, thousands of years. So I want to get into that a little bit first in his article. I'm just going to pull this clip out. Many of you have had the proud tradition of the Cornish passed down to you, but others are probably quite unaware of the background. Where is Cornwall? We're looking at it here. Scroll up so you can see how small of an area it really is. There's a lot of ancient secret mystery school stuff around here too. King Arthur, we're going to talk about a little bit, but you can see here's the English Channel. Here's the Normandy invasion, which I'm doing in my next upcoming book as well. My great uncle Pete Stowich, who's sitting up here behind me with his flag, they all came across and landed here. So it's very close. Here, London's over here, you can see. And I know if you're from the UK, you're familiar with this, but a lot of Americans are not. Here's Ireland over here, and Wales is where my grandmother Mary, her mother's family came from. They were miners from like this area right here. And then her father's family was from here. And then they met in Pennsylvania coal towns and got married there and had her. She was the oldest. Sorry, I have allergies. Uh, Cornwall or Kernow, Kernow, if you were spelling it in Cornish and sounding it out, is the southwestern tip of England. It's the homeland of the Cornish. Like the Irish, Scots, and Welsh, the Cornish are descended from the Celts. Tall, muscular, red-haired wanderers who probably came from the distant steppes beyond the Caspian Sea and appeared in northern Europe around 2000 BC. Some 5 or 6 centuries before the birth of Christ, some of the Celts came across the channel in small boats, and that would be right here they're talking about. The Goidels or Gaels, Gaelic, who are still found in Ireland and in the Highlands of Scotland, formed the first great migration. Then came the Brythons or Britons, still found in Wales and Cornwall, and that gave the whole isle the name of Britain. So they picked one of the invading forces. Despite the invasion of Britain by the Romans in 43 AD, so right after 10 years after Jesus Christ was killed, the Celts in Cornwall became, because of its isolation, were able to maintain their unique culture. But I think it's also deeper than that. There was a lot of wealth in the mining at that time. It was so rich. So I think they had a lot of power to be able to keep their culture as well. They weren't, they had the money to defend themselves and keep themselves all connected there. One of the biggest changes in Cornwall came around 500 AD, not from the Saxons and the Angles who invaded around 400 AD, but the change around 500 was from hundreds of individual monks and nuns who came down from Ireland and Wales to preach the gospel and teach Christianity. The springs there in this area, there's a lot of like healing springs. I'm going to write about that in the April novel. Bath, England is near here as well, and there's healing springs that people came. The Romans went there for their Roman baths. They built stuff there. But it wasn't just about like medical, it was about healing powers, nature-based religion, supernatural powers, power from the water. So these holy wells were adopted and stone crosses and chapels were erected. So the Christian, which is very common, they took over the natural sites from the older religions and then put the Christian symbols on top of it. Places were renamed and became saint. The word saint was applied to many of the areas in Cornwall today. And so there's a joke apparently that there's more saints in Cornwall than there are in heaven. The Angles Saxons, and they don't, we say Anglo-Saxon, but at this point, this writer is using the Angles, Angles, Saxons, had minimal control of Cornwall by 1000 AD. But occupation did not substantially change Cornish life until 1066 AD with the Norman invasion, the Battle of Hastings, which some of us still learn in school. William the Conqueror from Normandy gave most of Cornwall to his half-brother. So the Norman invasion, 1066, is when the French took over England overall. So the half-brother is not named here. I'm not sure which one that was, but William the Conqueror, and at the time it was called William the Bastard because he didn't have the pedigree to have, I think, more power in France. And then once he conquered England, he got a different he got a different moniker. But he gave castles to those that he favored. So there was dukes and earls that did not live on the properties, but expected income from the conquered Cornish estates. In the 1700s, three major changes began. So now it's 700 years later. English replaced Cornish as the common language. That was a big deal. And John Wesley converted many to Methodism, and the Industrial Revolution created new jobs. So the mine houses became part of the landscape. John Wesley, I'm going to do in a different topic because and I have a lot of his books and his brother Charles Wesley. They had a huge influence on the America that we know today and how Methodism was spread outdoors versus like inside of church buildings. And my own father was a Methodist minister, so I have part of this whole collection is a lot of that history. Um, but that came after. The Methodist came in the 1700s, and if you've read or listened to the Poldark saga, it was a historical fiction book that was on BBC and PBS, very prominent in the 1970s. I remember seeing it as a kid, but that whole series is based in Cornwall, and it's at the time of the American Revolution. And the main character, Ross Poldark, ends up coming and fighting for the British in America, and then he returns home to try to get his farm restarted or his estate maintained. So that's like the premise of that book. The Pasco name, my grandmother's maiden name is a name like Smith in the area. It's very, very common. And it's in that Poldark series as a supporting characters' names as well. I think it's the Poldark Bank. Um, most Cornish ancestors of Americans are associated with mining. Cornwall had a long tradition of mining, and in fact, as referenced in the Bible, and I'm glad that the author here, Bradford Landon, talks about this. The Phoenicians came again and again to Cornwall from the Eastern Mediterranean to buy tin. So the Phoenicians were a country just north of Israel today. So I think it's like overlapping with the land of Lebanon today. And I do have some of those maps in my Bible commentary books about that path going back and forth. And so there's archaeological digs today that are like supporting and documenting this, that it's tin from Cornwall that is over in the ancient relics being dug up in the Middle East. So there's definitely trade going back and forth. It's not a made up story. Joseph of Arimathea is the very wealthy merchant in uh, Palestine at the time of Jesus Christ. And if some of you are familiar with the name, it's because it's his tomb that Jesus Christ is buried in after he was tortured and crucified. So there is connections in England and stories, myths, oral histories about Joseph of Arimathea being like like the monolithic billionaire that was running the tin mines and bringing copper, tin, and other minerals back to the Middle East. So this whole like not just minerals, but also about shipping lanes and how to get things back and forth, import, export. So that would be very Cornish as well. I don't know how, for thousands of years, right? So this area of Cornwall, which tin had been mined, are known as the stannaries. Stannaries, stannaries. And from times of great antiquity, Cornish tin miners enjoyed rights and privileges, which became known as stannary law, and had their own institutions, which became the stannary law courts. Because the stannaries produced a considerable profit for the kings and queens of England and the earls and dukes of Cornwall, those associated with such mining enjoyed for many centuries the protection of the crown, the earls, and the dukes. So I think I'm going to go more into that in a later episode because this is now after the 12 leave. The 12 leave in the late 1600s with William Penn, and they come and settle in this township of Bensalem, which is a peninsula in southeast Pennsylvania. It's just north of the city of Philadelphia, touching the northeast border of Philadelphia, which is a quite large, area. The name Ben Salem, we're also going to get into it in another episode. It comes from this book, The New Atlantis by Francis Bacon. This is a little expanded version here. But when this was published about 50 years, what was the New Atlantis called? It was called Ben Salem. Uh, so there's a connection with Sir Francis Bacon, and how he got into politics was through the Rotten Boroughs here in Cornwall. And they're called, back then they were called the Cornish Rotten Boroughs because they were basically selling out their very low populated area to, I think, mostly like House of Lords type people that didn't have a seat there, but they were trying to control the House of Commons. And that is how Francis Bacon got his start in the British Parliament. So we'll go into that a little bit more. But there was definitely a connection with him to this area where the 12 Quakers left and came and they, you know, this seems like secret society stuff to me where they're using the name Ben Salem from his secretly published book. So I think that's enough for this episode. I'm gonna pause for now and we can digest this a little bit. I'm reading this into the record, helping me organize my thoughts for the April novel, and it's also some color background. If you want to come to my website and sign up, um, there's some more background because it's Nana's letters that are, and all the ones that she saved that are the basis of this book for her brother-in-law, which is my great uncle Pete Snowich. Pursuing Pete, a hidden hero's journey to World War II front lines. More to come. Namaste.